Joining us now live to discuss what has been a pretty busy old time in US politics and everything else to do with international affairs, Bruce Wolpe. Let's start with Donald Trump, and it's almost like weekly chapters in the world of Donald Trump.
It's true, and when the markets are sending signals that the U.S. is in trouble, that's when he takes affirmative action, and so he's put China back on a more positive footing, and that certainly helped the markets in near record territory. There was a jobless report overnight. Employment is still strong. Wages are still rising. So Trump is saying, what recession? What are you talking about here? So he's still projecting an aura of being in control, strong economy, strong base, Democrats divided, Republicans united. And so he sees challenges ahead, but he feels like he's in a pretty good place.
Yeah, because the other day they were mentioning that there is a glimmer of hope that the escalating trade war between the US and China was, affecting the markets.
On the surface, that's true. Yeah. We've been, up and down on this.
Well, it definitely has, hasn't it?
It has.
I've been trying not to ring my superannuation.
but the signals now are that things are back on track and they will meet. But I've talked to some China experts who have dealt with officials right under the presidential level, and what they're telling me is that the Chinese are viewing this as Trump demanding that he win and they lose, and that they lose publicly. So I think the question is, can a win-win deal be put together which actually gets to the heart of the structural reforms in trade that Trump wants? That is a real challenge, and that's absolutely going to be tested between now and the end of the year.
What do you think is driving him? Is it pure, true international diplomacy, or is it him looking internally at the United States and looking at the pressure that would be coming from a lot of the 50 states to say, sort this out?
It's actually both. And what he wants to do is he's aligned his personal beliefs on trade, which are long-standing. In the 80s, he was talking about Japan. In this decade, he's talking about China. And he wants America first and America to win. And he believes the trade rules around the world are unfair to the United States. The vice president was meeting with Boris Johnson yesterday, and his message was, President Trump supports what you want to do on Brexit and getting out of the European Union. Trump doesn't like the European Union. So he has this alignment, and he believes he's enforcing his agenda, and he believes it's good for America. Again, whether the 50 states feel that way, whether farmers feel that way, whether the American people feel that way, that's all going to be tested next year.
President Trump cancelled his trip to Poland because of the Hurricane Dorian, which of course got to a Category 5. It smashed the Bahamas. It's absolutely devastating. It's still not over. It's been downgraded, and the Carolinas look like they're still being, affected by it. How has he responded to all of this?
Well, and he's dodged really if a catastrophe had occurred and the authorities were not responding, that really would have hurt him politically. It's hard to talk about political terms when you're facing a human tragedy, but the storm did not do immense damage in the United States. The Carolinas are getting really soaked. There's going to be flooding, but nothing like what happened in the Bahamas. And Trump, he was the forecaster in chief. He was tweeting at 1 a.m. in the morning hurricane updates to the American people, and he has come through okay, and thank goodness the eastern seaboard has come through okay.
Yeah, there's still around 350,000 homes without power.
Without power,
still,
but that's not thousands of deaths.
No, well, that's what we're seeing on screen as well. It's just absolutely devastating. And there's going to be a spike in those deaths too.
Yeah, and then, as we see again, there's such a difference between the first world and the third world, and infrastructure and how they get affected by things. But you did mention Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson.
Johnson's in trouble too.
I know. It's an interesting parallel, isn't it, when you look at Donald Trump and Boris. They're very different in to how they came to power, but they're not that dissimilar in their manner in politics.
Not at all. They instinctively like each other. And it's kind of interesting if you look at the history of British politics and American politics, there are some cycles. It's not an exact coincidence, but if you think about it, Margaret Thatcher came to power a year before Ronald Reagan, so you had two conservative pillars in power at the same time. Bill Clinton was elected in '92. Tony Blair came in a couple years later. And so you had third-way progressives in power at the same time. And now you have Boris and you have Trump, and they are aligned. So the really interesting thing is, therefore, if Boris is stopped, if he's forced out of office, or if he loses an election, what does that signal in the United States? Does that mean the U.S. is going to make a left-hand turn in 2020? So it's kind of fun to think about. There are no iron rules here, but it is fun to look at the parallels in the two systems.
And there's a few more roadblocks in the English system, isn't there? And there's people pushing back, whereas Donald Trump and his presidency has been a bit like, get out of my way.
It's true. And what's happened in the UK is that Johnson has lost control of Parliament, and Parliament is now setting the rules. The United States House of Representatives is trying to do things, but Trump can override it. He can veto their legislation, and he can act by executive order. So yes, Trump is in a much stronger position as the executive than Johnson is as the prime minister.
We never have enough time to talk to you, so let's change tactics. We've got the presidential...
I'm here until tomorrow if you want.
There you go. We could just have the Bruce Wolpe show. Let's talk about the Democratic debate, which is on next week. So Joe Biden is the front runner. He said details are irrelevant the other day. He's been known for his gaffes and so forth. But what do you think?
That's exactly right, Janie. He makes gaffes on a regular basis, and the press is all over it. As soon as you make gaffes, the same thing happens here in Australia. But among mainstream Democrats who want a strong candidate to beat Trump, Joe Biden still has their heart and soul. And so he's leading. He has about 30% in the polls. Then under him, you have the two left-wing candidates. You got Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, and they're polling about 15 to 20% each. So together, they're kind of bigger than the left is bigger than the center. And then you have a whole bunch of other candidates underneath, everyone from Mr. Yang, our techno nerd, who has a wealth plan for America.
Well, he said he's the opposite of Donald Trump because he's an Aussie man who likes maths.
There you go. And then you have Kamala Harris, and you have Cory Booker, and a whole bunch of other people. They will all be on the same stage next Friday morning, Australia time. That's the first time that has happened. And so the question is, will Biden, who is challenged by age, challenged by these gaffes, is he going to continue to emerge as the front runner after seeing him against all the others, or will there be credible challengers to him? I think the key person to watch is Elizabeth Warren. She's been cutting through on her message. People are paying attention to her. She's rising, and she's rising not by attacking her competitor Bernie Sanders on the left or really Biden, but just saying, these are my policies. And so it's a positive, progressive message. It may be too left. Tim, you and I have discussed, is Democrats going to move too left to get elected? It may be too left, but if in the meantime, she's really building a base.
And if someone's going to, beat Donald Trump, it's going to be fought on domestic issues as well, isn't it? And where do you see this whole employment/unemployment issue?
It's the key to how Trump is ultimately perceived. Now, in economic growth and economic downturns, employment is the last thing to rise when you're coming out of a recession and the last thing to fall when you're going into a recession. So employment numbers that came out, they were a little bit lower than the average, but it's still low at 3.7%, 50-year low. Trump loves it. And the question is, will that be sustained into next year? If it is, if he has a strong employment story, I mean, that's bread and butter for American workers.
Absolutely. Well, good to see you, Bruce.
Great to see you both.
Might get you in tomorrow if you're in Sydney.
Okay.